It's Friday, so let's get to some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also catch us on wherever you listen to your podcast. For example, that can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. If this is your first time tuning in, well, I always say it's the best episode to tune in for, which is a Mailbag Friday. You can send in any question regarding the Royals, and we will get to it in today's episode. We got about 40 or so to get to, so lots to get to, little time to do so, but it's always a great way for your thoughts to be incorporated into this episode. But as for myself, I'm actually doing this episode from 810 WHB, working sports broadcasting right here in Kansas City. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, as I said, little time to get to many questions, so let's hurry things up here and get to question number one on YouTube from Brad. Hello, Jack. I am a fan of the podcast. Hypothetically, if the Royals are competitive at the trade deadline, does Taylor Ward or J.J. Bleday fit the team better? I would say yes, and thank you for the kind words. Taylor Ward is the perfect fit for the Royals. So we've been saying that now for the entirety of the offseason. J.J. Bleday would be a good fit as well, but it's clear that the Athletics, ever since leaving Oakland, have committed more to their young core of players and spending money. So you can't really treat them like the Athletics of old now, because they view J.J. Bleday, like Lawrence Butler, who they just signed to a big-time extension, as one of their core pieces to the future. Whereas Taylor Ward, you're talking about a guy who was a trade piece last deadline. The Angels aren't a very good team. If the Royals are in it, it wouldn't surprise me if they go after Taylor Ward again, assuming that the Angels hang on to him for the rest of spring training and leading into the regular season. Next one here is going to be coming from, looks like I'm doing this on the fly for YouTube. This one comes from Mark. Anyone know what happened to Nelson Velasquez? He played the first couple spring training games and has not played. Well, he was in the game last night, and if you watched my episode yesterday, he was on my opening day roster projection. He's out of options. He hasn't had a great spring, but the Royals targeting Adam Duvall makes me think they're trying to find a power bat off the bench. And then if they don't go the extra $2 million on Adam Duvall, or Duvall comes down on this price, Nelson Velasquez is your best chance at finding that power off the bench from the right side. Also had pretty good splits against lefties last year, and he wouldn't be viewed as an everyday player like he was leaving camp last season. So Velasquez was in the lineup yesterday. I expect him to get more opportunities before spring training wraps up. Next one here comes from Reese. What's the chance Pasquantino gets an extension sometime during the season? It feels a little bit unlikely during the season unless he starts putting together an all-star type year, because for me, it's not a question about the skill level for Vinny Pasquantino. It's more so about the health, the durability. I mean, all 3 seasons of his big league career have been ended a little bit short due to injury, right? In the first year, it was the labrum or the shoulder tear. That carried into the next year. He missed pretty much the entirety of the season. And then you look at last year, he has a freak injury in Houston where he gets his, hand caught up in, I want to say it was Yanier Diaz that was running down to first base when Lucas Ursig tried to barehand a comebacker and then threw it wildly to first base. But for an extension, they got to see that durability first and playing an entire season. So I would give it less than 20% that it's going to happen sometime during the regular season. But as always, things could change. Next one here is coming from Braden. Going back to Adam Duvall, the Royals are one of the few AL teams that stood pat and did not overextend themselves too much. How much more or less comfortable does that make you in a deep / tight AL playoff race? Well, I do believe the Royals were somewhat aggressive this offseason. They went out, got Jonathan India. They brought back Michael Wacha. They went out and got Carlos Estevez. There were some big moves that they made, and they could be argued as the most aggressive team in the AL Central this offseason next to Detroit, I would say. And that's the way I expected it to be going into the offseason. The Royals and the Tigers needed to improve, and for the most part, they've done that. Detroit, not so much offensively, and you could say the same thing for Kansas City. However, last year, without really a good leadoff hitter and a black hole at the bottom of the order, and really the middle of the order for that matter, the Royals won 86 games. And I do believe they've upgraded the offense. I believe they've upgraded the bullpen. There's still time to add, and there can be time to add at the deadline. So as of right now, I'm not too concerned that if it came down to the wire, the Royals wouldn't be able to compete, because I do believe with their rotation and their bullpen, it would be able to mask a subpar offense that would be later on in the season. Next one here, we're actually going to be jumping over to we might be staying on YouTube here, actually. Yeah, the next one here comes from Jackson. I thought we might have been done there on the YouTube side of things. But Jackson's question is, what are your expectations for the Royals this season, and what would be a success/disappointment in your eyes? Well, I would say a success is getting back to the postseason. I mean, the Royals, even in that core run of 2013 to 2017, went to the postseason back-to-back years exactly one time, and that was 14 and 15. You do that again, I mean, that is still very impressive to do, considering the lack of success that's happened in Kansas City for the better part of 25 years. I mean, they had two playoff appearances going into last year since 2000, right? It was only 14 and 15. They had missed it every other year. So getting back to the postseason, that should be considered a success. Yes, you want to make it further, but I'm not saying it's World Series or bust or anything like that. A disappointment, I believe, would be out of it by the deadline. I mean, if they're 15, 20 games under 500 and you're having to sell off pieces, you're almost back to square one, it feels like, where now all of your, playoff talent that you had in 2024 is gone. You're having to retool a little bit. That would be a disappointment of a season if they are completely out of it by the first half of the season. This one is coming from Stormy. Based on your opinion, do you think the Royals can capture some 2015 magic and have a three-headed monster in Lucas Erceg, Carlos Estevez, and Hunter Harvey? Very optimistic, however, the stuff these guys have when healthy can't be overlooked. Absolutely. I don't know if I'd go as far to say that they have the three-headed monster look, but it could be one of the stronger back ends of the bullpen that we see across the American League. I mean, Lucas Erceg is one of the better relievers, in my opinion. Carlos Estevez is the epitome of consistency over the last handful of years. And then you look at Hunter Harvey. When healthy, he's got lights-out stuff. I mean, a 92-mile-an-hour splitter to pair with a near triple-digit fastball. Those three are going to be able to lock down a lot of games for the Royals if they are healthy. I'm just not going to go as far to say the 2015 Magic or the 2014 Magic, because those guys were ridiculous. All three of them were virtually unhittable. There are going to be times this season where one of those guys has an off night where, back in 14 and 15, how many off nights did Greg Holland, Kelvin Herrera, or Wade Davis have? Maybe one or two where they really imploded. And that's just because they were so freakishly good. These guys can be really damn good, but I don't know if I would go as far to say they could be, the 2015 version of that bullpen. Not a bad question, though. I'm with you. I'm very optimistic as well on what they could be for this bullpen. And lastly, on YouTube, Patrick's question is, where is your ideal location for a new stadium? If they can make it work, I mean, downtown baseball sounds phenomenal in Kansas City, and that's still where I believe they're going to go to. I just don't know which exact site they would pick. I wouldn't want it to be too far from the Power and Light District, because I want to be able to have that type of experience of, hey, the game's at 7:10. We're going down there right after work, grabbing a few drinks, going to the game. After the game, going back out, having more drinks, or you go grab dinner before the game, then go to the ballpark, then get drinks afterwards, and just enjoy downtown in that area. So that would be my ideal destination if they can find a way to make it work. But with John Sherman, it always feels like that was the focus, getting a ballpark downtown, not somewhere where it's another remote location where there's not much to do around there. Even if you had to build it up, that doesn't feel likely to me. When the Royals do move that stadium, I do imagine it's going to be downtown. If I missed any of your questions on YouTube, I apologize. As you can tell, I stall a little bit when I'm looking over at YouTube. So if I missed any of your questions, please just shoot them directly to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15, or leave another comment on this video below. And before the weekend's over, I'll be sure to get back to it and answer your question. But let's take our first break. When we come back, about 30 questions to get to on Twitter. Don't want to leave anybody out. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor today in FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to be in on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. For my pick, I'm going to go to that Houston and Baylor game tomorrow night. I'll take the over on point total for LJ Cryer, and I will take the Cougars to finish up the regular season with a win in Waco. As I mentioned, we got about 30 questions to get to on Twitter, and I do not want to leave anybody out here. So beginning things with question number 1, this is from Connor. When do you think the Royals will call up Noah Cameron, and where do you view his role on the team in the future? He will get up at some point if he's healthy in 2025, and I'd imagine it would be for a spot start. I view him more so as a starter than I do out of the bullpen. If he fails as a starter, that's where he's going to end up. But personally, I believe he could be a guy that gives you anywhere from 5 to 6 starts this year if the Royals need him to. And that's how I view him. For the future, one of those final spots in the rotation should be his. And I'm probably more so looking to 2026 when Lorenzen's gone. We'll see what happens with Chris Bubich and Alec Marsh and Daniel Lynch. But to me, by 2026, I would feel pretty confident saying Noah Cameron is going to be in the Royals rotation. Next one here is going to be coming from, looks like Jamie. Do you see the possibility with this season, Melendez, Garcia, and Fermin all break out? Realistically, who has the best chance in your opinion? To me, it feels like it's always going to be Melendez. Fermin's not going to play enough to be a breakout player. Michael Garcia hits the ball incredibly hard, but with Melendez, when you factor in the power and when he's going well, the walk rate, Garcia is never going to be a guy that draws enough walks. Like Melendez has the best chance to, but a safer bet might be Michael Garcia because of the hard hit rate, because of some of those advanced numbers. But to me, I'll buy into the hype, whether it burns me or not. I do imagine that the best chance to have a breakout would be MJ Melendez in 2025. I could absolutely see, though, a world in which Michael Garcia is the one to break out and not Melendez. Bobby Litt Jr. asks, are the Royals still looking for an outfield bat? Yes, they are. They are still trying to upgrade that depth a little bit. And whether it works out or not, I mean, we've seen this offseason. The Royals could be actively looking for somebody, and then you get a few days before opening day and you go, you know what, we'll revisit this at the deadline. But yes, right now, they are still looking out there. They're a very active bunch. And when I mean active, talking a lot, talking to a lot of teams, seeing if they can find an upgrade here or there. I mean, J.J. Picola, when he took over the job, said he wanted to be more transactional. I believe he's lived up to that. So, yes, they are still looking. How aggressively? Like, are they on the cusp of making a deal? I don't know that. But, yes, I mean, you can even see from the report the other day with Adam Duvall, they are trying to add, an outfield bat to help out the depth a little bit, mainly because of some of the injuries that are happening in camp. Dylan's question, I asked this question earlier in the offseason, but I think the answer you gave could change now. Could you see Jack Caglione joining this team around the trade deadline as the big middle-of-the-order bat that's needed? Yeah, I could see a world in which that happens. With Jeff Passan's article about scouts buzzing with Jack Caglione being up as early this summer, it's certainly possible. And he's done himself certainly a lot of favors. Down in Surprise, 4 for 9. He's walked a few times. He's homered twice. He wasn't going to get many at-bats in spring training, but he's made the most of them. And I do believe there's a world if he goes down there to Double-A and hits 350 that he could be up in Kansas City as early as the deadline, and he could be that middle-of-the-order bat. But as I said in my episode earlier this week, You don't want him to be the solution to a struggling offense. You want him to join an already thriving offense. So to say he's the answer as the middle of the order bet, that might be going too far. But to see him up around the deadline, there is a world in which that happens this year. Sports' question is if Joe C hits the big leagues by the end of the year, is an offseason trade of Vinny P likely? Seems like he could bring back the young center fielder or power bat they need. I'm imagining you're meaning Jack Caglione. Might have just been a typo there. I don't believe they're going to trade Vinny if Jack comes up. That's something you handle in the offseason. If Jack comes up this year and he could be a better first baseman, I believe Vinny would then be the full-time DH because there's still no full-time DH in Kansas City. And even then, Vinny would still play first base from time to time. But Jack being able to play both first base and a corner outfield spot, that allows you to keep Vinny Pasquantino. And no, I don't see a world in which they are going to trade him or try to leverage him to be a trade chip this offseason, even if Jack does make it up. Jack Caglione could be the first baseman and Vinny can be the DH, or Jack could be the right fielder and Vinny could be the first baseman, depending on some of those defensive numbers. Jeremy's question is, how many games are you trying to go to this year as a Royals fan and for your job? Well, I'll be on the road a few times as well. I would say, realistically, as a fan, try to make it out to roughly 20. And then for work, I would say, 20 to 25 more. That always can change, though, too, because I think last year my goal was to go to, like 10 or 15 as a fan, and I ended up going to 20 to 25. And as for work, it was a lot more as well. It just comes down to scheduling here with what I do. But I would imagine if I set the total at 40, I would take the over as well. But I'll ballpark it for that right now as a fan and as for work, around 40 games, because there will be a few times that on the fly or last minute, I'll be traveling to go watch them play somewhere. So we'll see, though. I know right now that I am going to be going to that San Francisco series in May. Will be a lot of fun. Should be there for game 1 and game 2. Next question is from Spoons. 3 guys you're excited about for 2025 who won't make the opening day roster. Jack doesn't count. I would say Luander Avila would be number 1 for me. Noah Cameron, I'll throw in there as well, even though he's had back-to-back not very good outings. To me, he's somebody I'm absolutely keeping an eye on. And then number 3, Carter Jensen. I mean, Carter Jensen has so much power. He's such an easy kid to root for, and I believe this could be a huge year for him to make that big leap and becoming, a top 100 prospect, but more so in the 70 to 100 range, to making that jump all the way to maybe top 40. I could see that for Carter Jensen in 2025. So those would be the 3 guys I'm very much looking forward to this upcoming season. Beans' question, with India, Garcia, and Massey getting time in the outfield, learning a new position, do you think we will notice a drop-off in overall team defense compared to last year? You can expect it. I don't believe there's ever going to be a time where they have Garcia in center and India in left. You got to protect one of those guys, unless Garcia shows that he is a well above average center fielder. But that, to me, feels like it's too much to ask for. There is always going to be protection for one of those guys. If Jonathan India or Michael Massey's in left field, Kyle Isbell's going to be in center field. If Garcia's in center field, I'd imagine you could even move an Isbell to left field, or if Joey Weimer's out there in left field, Melendez can play that spot. Renfroe can play that spot. They're not going to put 2 inexperienced guys in the outfield right next to each other. But you can expect a little bit of a dip, maybe early on, but as they get more comfortable with that spot, it should go back to, the average there, because infield defense is so elite for the Royals and center field defense is so elite. I don't expect it to be a drastic change. Cole Reagan's mustache asked, do you think Cag starts the year at AA playing outfield or first base? I could see them really needing that bat in the lineup come August or September for the postseason push. When talking to JJ a few weeks back, he is going to start at first base. That I feel very strongly about. The path, I would say, to get to August or September with Jack Caglione in the lineup would be he starts off the year playing first base, hitting 340 to 350. Then you can make that transition to, hey, he's making a mockery of AA. Let's try him in the outfield. We can try him in right field or in left field. Then you go to the next point of that and say, are the Royals contending? If they're contending, then you get to that point in August or September, maybe even July, and say, he's hitting well. He's torturing AA and AAA pitching. He can play an outfield spot. Now we'll see him up there. But to start the year, he will be playing first base, and I feel very confident in that. Let's get to one more before our final break. Casey Preds fan asks, can't come up with any burning questions, really, so I'll just ask a fun one. What is your favorite regular season Royals game you've ever been to? I would say my favorite one would have to be, I'll even take out opening day here. There was one game where I had actually just had surgery on my arm. I had broken, I was 12 or 13 at the time, and it was some 35 to 40 degree game in 2013 for the Royals. It was not long after opening day. They were playing the Twins. It's freezing. And the Royals ended up winning that game. They had gotten off to a hot start, but I had just gotten out of the hospital, wanted to go to the game. And the reason it's fun is because it's one of those memories where I'll hopefully never have to do that again, where you have a cast on your arm, you just had surgery, and you go out to the game. But it's one of those experiences. There was maybe 10,000 people there. It was freezing. The Royals won the game. But I like that. I'm a sucker for games like that where it might be freezing. It's a unique game or something crazy happens. I've been to many walk-offs before, but to throw a weird one in there, yeah, coming out of surgery, going to the game a few hours later, it was freezing. Went with a buddy of mine, so it was a blast. Yeah, I had a lot of fun back then. Went to many games in 2013 for that matter. But yeah, leave any comment on YouTube or on Twitter your favorite regular season game you've been to, because I was at the wild card game. That'll never be top for me. Maybe it can be, but I doubt it, because the 29-year drought, going to a playoff game for the first time in Kansas City, having a game like that, that'll be number one for me. But regular season, that'll be my answer. Okay, let's take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap it up with our final set of questions on a Mailbag Friday, next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Let's kick it off with Jerry for our final set of questions. He asks, who would you pick to be the 2025's version of the Royals and surprise everyone? I'm going out in a limb and predicting the Oakland Athletics. Not a bad one. I would feel more confident in saying the Reds on the National League side, which may not make Royals fans feel too good because Brady Singer's over there. The Royals take Jonathan India. Does that mean the Reds are going to be better than the Royals? Not that, but they've got talent over there, and they're going to be healthier, and I love what their pitching department does with their starters, which is find some island of misfit toys. They upgrade a lot of their already good starters. Hunter Green's over there, Nick Lodolo, Brady Singer's now in that rotation. If they can fix that bullpen a little bit, that Reds team can compete in the National League Central. So they're going to be my pick as the 2024 Royals, kind of mirroring that in 2025. This one comes from Tanner. What are the chances we see Jack before the All-Star break? I saw stuff saying he's starting to take reps in the outfield. Maybe we don't need to trade for a bat. Well, again, I believe he'll take outfield reps. He hasn't so far in spring training, at least not in game action. Before the All-Star break, man, he's going to have to hit 400 plus in Double-A. I mean, he would really need to show that there is no need to dilly-dally around at the minor league level. So before the All-Star break, less than 10%. After, I'm kind of creeping up to 40%. That we could see him there. And it really all comes down to his offensive production. They could live with average to below average defense at first base in the outfield if his bat is that good. But yeah, if you get to the deadline and he's hitting 350 in Double-A or Triple-A, you might not need to trade for a bat, and he could be that answer, even though you don't want to put all that pressure on him in the lineup. Dev's question, what's the absolute minimum you would take to call 2025 season a successful one? 80 wins, playoffs, what's the bar we have to meet? I'm going to say if they don't make the playoffs, you got to be in it up until that final series of the year. Like, that to me is the bare minimum coming off what you did last year. You don't want to take a step back. I'm predicting this team to get to the postseason. Anything short of that would be a disappointment. But to be realistic, if they finished, 86 and 76 in the Central was better, and they finished a game or two out of a playoff spot, I can't call it a catastrophic disaster or disappointment to that end, because 86 and 76 is still a really good season. You might have just fallen a bit short because of a better division. The accountant's question is, are the Royals holding off to make a move for a veteran bat based on the hope of a resurgence by MJ coupled with a potential June call-up of Jack Caglione? It's not that they're not making a deal because those guys are being evaluated. MJ is going to get a chance to prove that, whether they add a bat or not. And the bats they're looking for aren't going to be everyday players. Adam Duvall is not an everyday player. We get to the deadline, that's probably a better question for then. If the Royals don't make a serious move at the deadline and they're in it, that would make me think that Jack Caglione is going to be up at some point in 2025 to help them make that playoff push. But as of right now, the guys they're looking for, it would be a bench bat, a platoon bat. And if they add Adam Duvall, if they go after Starling Marte, MJ Melendez is still going to be that guy they're banking on to be a big contributor in 2025. Eli's question is, what is your hot take for the season? Mine would be Nelson Velasquez hits 35 homers this season in a Jorge Soler-esque season. That certainly is a hot take. Mine would be Chris Bubic making the All-Star game. That sounds crazy, but to me, I feel that he really can make a strong transition to the rotation, and it's not going to shock me if he has some crazy first half. Maybe not like Jason Vargas first half where he's leading the league and wins and has a sub-3 ERA. But to me, Chris Bubic could be that sneaky, really, really good number 4, number 5 starter where the numbers are good enough to get you into an all-star game. How many innings he works, that might be the difference. I mean, if he only's thrown 75, 80 innings in the first half, he's not going to get to the all-star game. But, man, if he gets a little bit higher than that, there is a chance. So since you go that hot with your take, I'll go that hot with my take and Chris Bubic being an all-star. This one is Delusional Royals fan. What would it take to trade for Marte? I would imagine just one of the relievers at the big league level. Angel Serpa, Hunter Harvey, maybe Carlos Hernandez or Chris Stratton, probably more so Carlos Hernandez, but it wouldn't take a lot. Maybe throw in one prospect because the Mets would be having to pay a chunk of that salary. He's making, I want to say, around 17 to 19 million this year. So they would be paying down a lot of that contract. And if they do that, you might need to give an extra prospect, not a top 15 one, but somebody else to throw in there to bring in Marte. So that would be my best guess, at least for what the reports have been out there of what they've discussed, which is Angel Serpa and Hunter Harvey for Starling Marte. But anytime you have a team paying a chunk of the contract, you got to expect to be throwing in another prospect as well to that deal. This one is from Brother Cag. What is Gavin Cross's ceiling? Can we count on him to take a starting outfield spot in the future? Count on him? No. Be hopeful he can? Yes. The ceiling is maybe a starter in the outfield for one season, but also being a guy that could maybe carry that into 2 seasons. Like if he takes right field next year, I could see him being the starting right fielder for 2026 and 2027 as a league average bat. But being a first rounder, you always expect to have a little bit more. I just don't know if I'm there yet with Gavin Cross. Need to see him be healthy first before I can make any strong predictions. But yeah, I believe at one point he will be a starter in Kansas City if he does stay healthy. Charles's question, is there any player you have hopeless optimism for being better than they were last year? It's MJ, and it always will be MJ until he's not in a Royals uniform anymore. I'll throw Garcia into that as well. I just have blind optimism with both those guys. Might get burned by it, might not. I hope I'm right with it and finally being able to roll the dice and be correct on MJ Melendez or Garcia. There's always a good chance, though, that just doesn't happen. Goose's question is, I know a small sample size, but how has Garcia looked in center field so far? Hasn't gotten too many opportunities, so not enough to tell you he looks great or he doesn't look great. He's athletic enough to handle the spot. Not as well as Kyle Isbell, but better than Dairon Blanco, I believe, could. That would be my measuring tool, if you will, is he better than Blanco? I believe he can be ceiling-wise, but he's not going to be as good as Kyle Isbell because Kyle Isbell is one of the top center fielders defensively in all of baseball. This one comes from Briley. Will Ursic still close games or be more of a fireman role? We actually discussed this in yesterday's episode. I believe he's going to be the fireman early on, and Carlos Estevez will be the closer because of what they're paying him and the closing experience. Mike's question, barring several injuries, are Daniel Lynch's days as a starter over? Not necessarily. I could see him maybe pitching really well in the bullpen, and if somebody's struggling, he can take that spot, but you don't want that to happen for the sake of the Royals rotation where it's at right now. You want Lorenzen and Bubic to be good and Daniel Lynch to thrive in the bullpen, but if one of those guys struggle, I feel he could get one of those first cracks at taking one of the rotation spots and running away with it. Man, still a lot to get to here, so I got to go rapid fire. Matt's question: how many of these guys do you see getting DFA'd, and who would replace them on the 40-man roster? Nick Prado, Chris Stratton, Nelson Velasquez, Carlos Hernandez. I got Hernandez and Velasquez making the roster right now. Stratton getting DFA'd. We'll say that, maybe Kevin Biggio takes that spot. Prado could get DFA'd but come back to Kansas City. So if I'm adding two guys there, oh, man. Let's go with Kevin Biggio and maybe one of those other minor league deal guys they brought in. Junior Fernandez maybe gets added to the 40-man roster. He threw the third hardest pitch in spring training the other day. So maybe he gets added for Stratton, and then Prado, Kevin Biggio would be. But also James MacArthur could go on the 60-day IL. So those would be my picks as of right now. I don't got the 40-man roster in front of me, but to play it safe, I'll go with those answers. Kate's question is, I really hope Nelson Velasquez makes the roster, but I don't think it'll happen. I feel he has 30 home run pop. I have him making the roster because he's out of options, and if they don't get Adam Duvall, it would make a lot of sense. But he still has to play pretty well in the final couple weeks of spring training here to lock in that spot. Right now, I'm hopeful, but he does need to have a better spring here to maybe ensure that spot. Gary's question is, trading Vinny an option when Jack is ready, or will Jack be learning at a new position over this season? I don't see them trading Vinny, and there's a world in which you can have both of them on the roster. You can have Jack in right field, Vinny at first. You can have Jack at first, Vinny at DH. So there's not really a rush to trade Vinny just because Jack is going to be fast-tracking through the minor league level. So I would get used to Vinny Pasquantino. I don't see them trading him anytime soon. Jason's question is, do you think Kyle Isbell could possibly lose his starting job if he doesn't start hitting in the regular season? Yeah, it would have to take John Rave playing really well, as you mentioned in this question, or they go out there and acquire another bat. But his defense is so good, he's going to need to be one of the worst hitters, I believe, maybe in the division, for him to lose that spot because the defense is so good. I Collect's question, would like to talk Vinny overall. If he has an outstanding season, does he get traded for that outfield spot? Do they extend him and move Jack around? Don't see Vinny moving off first, so mostly curious what you think they will do with him. I'd imagine they will keep him at first base until Jack's there. If Jack proves he's a good defensive outfielder, then he will stay in the outfield. If Jack is a better first baseman, Jack will play first and Vinny would DH. Those are my thoughts right now. Josh's question, are you as concerned as I am about not having many right-handed hitting options this year and in the near future? Looking down the road to 2027, only Bob and Michael are reasonable bets to be solid contributors. It is something I have been paying attention to a little bit. You want to have definitely a plethora of right-handed hitters with as often as Matt Quatrero changes around that lineup. But I would imagine next offseason there will be an emphasis on adding some big-time bats for the middle of the order because they didn't land it this offseason. I would need to go check out the entire free agent list, but that's something, because the way Q manages the lineup, they want to be able to have multiple options out there, not just two right-handed bats as you brought up. So yes, it is something to keep an eye on. I'm not overly concerned because I believe they've got time to add some big-time major league talent hitting from the right side. Royals Data Dugout asks, who has the most to gain in the last couple weeks of spring training? Who has the most to lose? Most to gain, Nelson Velasquez, Nick Lofton, Kevin Biggio, Noah Cameron, maybe Alec Marsh if he can get going. The most to lose, you could make a case that Kyle Isbell could be somebody that has a lot to lose if he really doesn't play well. None of the everyday starters other than him, I feel, are in jeopardy of losing a lot in spring training. Dairon Blanco does because he's been sidelined now with the Achilles tightness. I could also see someone like Nick Prado having a lot to lose because if he doesn't play well at all the rest of the way, he will be out of a job because he's out of options. So those would be my picks right now, as guys that need to play well and maybe guys that absolutely have to play well if they expect to have a spot in this organization by the end of the month. And lastly, Kyle's question is, who makes the most starts in left field this year, Melendez, India, or Massey? Great question because you threw Melendez in there. I feel that Jonathan India is going to get a lot of starts out there, but I'll play it safe and say Melendez does because that's really the only spot you can play Melendez if it's not DH. So I'll go MJ gets the most starts out there. They're still going to be rotating Jonathan India and Michael Massey out there plenty, though, over the course of 2025. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We're going to be off this weekend, of course, unless there is some move that happens. But until Monday, you take it easy, Kansas City.